Hey everyone!
Hola a todos!
This is Jahaira.
And this is Stephanie, and welcome to Cuento Crimen podcast.
Y aquí on the Cuento Crimen podcast, we are a true crime podcast and we bring a new case every Wednesday.
Cada miércoles.
And these are cases that don't get much media attention, so chances are you haven't heard of some of these cases.
And we cover these cases in Spanglish.
Así que agarra a tu abuelita, tu abuelito, tu mamá, tu papá, a quien tú gustes, and come join us every Wednesday for a new true crime case. So, April Marie Tinsley nació el 18 de marzo del 1980 y ella vivía in Fortwayne, Indiana with her parents and her little brother.
She was an 8-year-old like any other little girl. She was, enjoying every bit of the world and exploring new experiences. And, I think at 8 years old, you're learning about so much. You're taking in everything.
You're still figuring out the world.
Just a little girl running around with no worries, laughing with her friends and daydreaming about what she wants to be when she grows up. And overall, just a kid without any worries.
And April was only a second grader at Fairfield Elementary School, and she was part of the children's choir at the Faith United Methodist Church. Entonces, como dijo Steph, she was just enjoying life. That was her. And that was a bit of a background on April. Como decíamos, she was just enjoying life. She was young. And everything seemed okay. But on April 1st, 1988, which was Good Friday, by the way, April was playing with friends. And they were all neighbors, so todos estaban allí cerquitas. And that's when April decided to go back to her friend's house to get an umbrella because it had started to rain a little bit. Allí ella había dejado su sombrilla en la casa de su amiga, so she thought it was no big deal of just going back and getting it. And so April had just walked around to the corner to get the umbrella, and that was the last time that anyone saw her, and this was around 3 p.m. However, it did take a couple of hours for someone to notice that April never came back. And I mean, they were running between houses, right? Era el grupo de niños. And it's kind of hard to keep track of donde están, or you kind of see or you hear the noise, so you just think that they're all there. Mm-hmm. So it took a while hasta que alguien por fin was kind of April never came back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's super normal. Growing up with in a neighborhood where you're getting along with the neighbors, and you're running around from one corner to the next. And this is kind of before iPads and technology, right?
Yeah.
So
I was gonna say, it feels like a whole different lifestyle era. Yeah.
And so parents are kind of inside, and the kids are playing in the front lawn, and from one moment to the next, it could be in the backyard and again in the front lawn, and it's just back and forth. And so her friends are also 8 years old, so they didn't think it was weird that she didn't come back, or they just didn't really
they probably didn't even notice. Yeah.
Maybe if they did think something, they probably thought that she just went home and she couldn't go back out. Because the parents do those kind of things where ya no te dejan salir.
Yeah, and then also I don't know, they're kids. I feel sí puedes pensar, but you're not gonna think of all the dangers and all the bad side of the world, And so April's mom, Jeanette Tinsley, noticed that she went missing by dinner time, because allí es cuando they realized that all the kids had gone home except April. April didn't come home. And so she made some calls, and that's when she realized that her daughter was missing and that it had been a while since anyone really saw her. The good thing was that Janet reported her missing right away. She did not waste any time. And so April was reported missing from her William Street home in South Central Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Y luego the search began. Fort Wayne police officers and volunteers all gathered and started helping in the search.
I love to hear how there's no time wasted. No one's waiting for anything. All we know is nadie miró a April, and so now let's look for her. And later, a witness, which was a neighborhood girl, came forward and said that she saw a white man in his 30s forcing a girl into his blue pickup truck. And this little girl did witness this hours earlier than, now that she's speaking up. Pero probablemente, era chiquita ella, entonces a lo mejor no captó la gravedad de lo que estaba viendo or what it even meant, you know, like forcing someone into a truck, right?
Yeah, like how is this little girl going to, you know, assume that this man could potentially hurt this little girl? She could imagine maybe it's a dad that wants, you know, is in a hurry or something like that. So,
or like even like trabajando con niños, like you kind of learn que ellos están viendo, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're captivating
or
like understanding or
they
reflecting.
Could be fixating on something else.
Literally
like,
could be like the girl's shoes.
Yeah,
you know?
I was
like,
just thinking that.
So yeah, and then later on she probably hears, oh, like la niña está desaparecida, and then like you finally connect the dots. You know?
It's like complicated. And it's because she's a little girl, you know. But I am glad that she, you know, like did bring it up when she found out that, you know, there's this whole search party going on.
For
like,
sure.
You know. Entonces, a unos días después de la desaparición de April, on April 4th, 1988, a jogger from DeKalb County discovered a little girl's body. And, you know, later on, you know, quickly they were able to identify this as April's body. And the jogger came across this body at around 3:30 p.m. that day between County Roads 47 and 51 west of Spencerville in a ditch. And after investigators arrived, they, you know, started, you know, scoping out the place, you know, tratando de ver si pueden colectar like any kinds of hints and evidence. And right away, they believed that the body had been placed there within 4 hours. So which means que alguien dejó el cuerpo de April right there in the middle of the day. You know, it's like day, it's like right outside because they found her body around 3:30 p.m. So here's a little description of what they found at the crime scene. April was clothed, but her underwear and socks were inside out. So investigators assumed that she could have been sexually abused and redressed and then left there. And also this location where she was found was just 20 miles away from her house.
Kind of obvious, but like when they place a body, then that automatically means that there was, you know, someone did this. Like, and so when the autopsy came back, it revealed that April was sexually abused and suffocated. And it also revealed that she had been dead for 2 days when her body was discovered. There was some DNA that was recovered from the scene, but, you know, at the time it was 1988. And so they couldn't do much with the DNA. Like, they did not have the tools that we luckily have nowadays. But luckily, they did decide to preserve what they had, which I'm glad that they did.
Yeah, I'm glad that they did because, like, we've seen this now that, you know, technology is, like, so much more advanced and you can do a lot more now.
And it's also kind of cool to think about how, like, back then ellos estaban pensando en el futuro. Like, por si quizás en el futuro sepan cómo, you know, manejar todo eso or, like, they have tools or something. I don't know. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. And so, el mismo día, on April 4th, 1988, a motorist reported seeing a blue truck that stopped earlier Sunday in the middle of DeKalb County Road 68, where the body was found.
So because of this, police are focusing on that blue pickup. Because, you know, also at this point, it's kind of the only clue that they really have.
On April 7th, 1988, investigators released a drawing of a man that witnesses saw with April in the 2300 block of Hogman Avenue between 3 and 4. And the day she disappeared. The man is described as someone in his 30s and weighing 150 pounds and with the blue pickup.
And this drawing and description brought in so many calls. Y después de unos días, el 11 de abril del 1988, authorities brought in a suspect, Everett Scholl. Él era un hombre de 34 años y mucha gente cuando estuvo llamando dieron el nombre de él because he just had such a strong resemblance to the sketch that they had made. Like, he looked so much like this person. And so a lot of people thought that it was him.
Y también había gente que decía que, you know, Everett tenía una blue pickup and he had it parked in front of his house.
It's just kind of connecting the dots. Like, you have a blue pickup truck and you resemble the sketch, so it's...
Yeah, and like the fact that a lot of people are catching on and calling this in is like, of course, investigators have to like look into it. And also some callers said that this person was going around saying that he had information and knowledge about the kidnapping and murder of April.
So authorities questioned him, pero después de tenerlo por 8 horas, the Fortwayne Police Department charged him with a different case. the molestation of an 11-year-old girl committed back in October 1987. And articles, that we kind of looked into stated that it was his ex-girlfriend's daughter.
And so police did take his hair and fluid samples to compare with what they found at April's crime scene and on her body. And they also took samples from 5 other men that they questioned, and these men were never named.
Y después del 20 de abril del 1988, volunteers formed the acronym APRIL, and it stands for Associated Parents Regional Independent League. And later they changed it to Abduction Prevention, Reconnaissance, and Information League. And basically, this was just formed to organize searches for missing children.
On April 26, 1988, investigators submitted hair and blood samples from these 5 men that we mentioned before, and they submitted samples to a private lab in Germantown, Maryland for DNA typing.
And on May 5th, 1988, they investigate devil worship as a motive for April's case after questioning some men rumored to be involved in a cult. But they quickly ruled this one out. And I would say when I first read this part, I was like, that's a very interesting turn. Mm-hmm. And it's also interesting to see how, these beliefs kind of intertwine with true crime.
Yes, and also that they, looked into it. They didn't ignore something like this. On May 24th, 1988, the 34-year-old man that we mentioned earlier, Everett Scholl, was released after being acquitted of the child molestation charge that happened in October of 1987.
On August 9th, 1988, they announced that the DNA samples, how they took the samples of the 5 men they had submitted earlier, could not exclude or include the suspects. So basically, it was kind of inconclusive, right? Mm-hmm. Nothing really came from it.
Yeah. And so, at this point, they are, trying to chase every lead that they have. But they're not coming up with anything. Entonces, they start looking into all the sex offenders in the area. Pero desafortunadamente no encontraron nada.
Pero en el año 1990 encontraron una nota en un granero en Allen County. Y esta nota tenía un mensaje y decía, I kill 8-year-old April Marie Tinsley. And her name, April was spelled correctly, but her last name was not. Her last name was Tinsley, but this one was spelled Tinsley. Mm-hmm. And it also has some grammar, I kill 8-year-old instead of I killed.
Yes.
So just something to take note of.
Yeah. And también había another message, in the same area que decía, and I quote, "Did you find her other shoe? Ha ha, I will kill again." End quote. And this message was done with crayon. And, in the crime scene when April Tinsley was found, they did in fact only find 1 shoe. And so this information was private to investigators and detectives on the case. No one else knew this. The public didn't know. So the fact that that detail is given,
it's scary because it obviously this person is kind of taunting them, right? Mm-hmm. But you never really know, are they being for realsies or are they just trying to create you know something that is in there? But then they hit you with a detail that's not open to the public, and that makes it scary. Mm-hmm. And there's also a witness that noticed a man roaming around the area near the barn door. Y si no lo dijimos antes, la nota fue encontrada on the barn door. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of, again, these weird coincidences or the dots are connecting. Mm-hmm. But the witness could not give a description of this man because, it's always usually kind of dark or estaba a una distancia. Mm-hmm. Y también el witness was a kid. Entonces, ahí es cuando se complica también otra vez las cosas. But this witness did have something very interesting to say. Él decía que as the days passed by y la nota estaba ahí en la puerta, la tinta en que la nota fue escrita became darker, right? So it's kind of layered, someone went back and kept writing over and just making it bolder and darker, the ink itself. So that means that if this man was the one leaving the notes, he was coming back to just kind of rewrite it again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, of course, all this is very concerning, right? So investigators did look into this message that was on the St. Joseph Township barn door, with this like misspelled message that we were talking about. And all of this came into the radar in May 1990. So yeah, this was 2 years later, después de la desaparición y asesinato de April Tinsley. And so, this message is really scary to investigators and the community, right? 3 weeks later, another disappearance and murder happened. This was on June 14th, 1990, when a 7-year-old went missing. Her name was Sarah Jean Bowker. She was later found dead, and they did get her killer. And we're bringing this up because I think there was a lot of like conversations about, April Tinsley's case and Sarah Jean Bowker's case being related. And because it kind of happened, pretty close in time, and, they didn't have April's killer yet. And luckily they did find Sarah's killer, fairly quickly, but unfortunately he passed away in 1994. So he never really made it to trial. There was conversations between both cases being connected.
But however, on August 7th, 1991, the FBI concluded that April's and Sarah's cases were unrelated and that they were probably murdered by different people. But the person who conducted the autopsy stated publicly que they deeply believe that the girls were killed by the same person.
So like there was always like that uncertainty, or like people just believing this or that,
Yeah. It's tricky. Like, it's tricky when you have like, a murder case and a clear motive, but you just don't know who's out there and who was responsible for this. But yeah, like there's always just going to be different opinions and theories that people have. The Sarah Jean Bowker became a solved case, and it was not connected to April Tinsley at the end of the day. It was just a lot of speculation.
Time and time passes, and this is super frustrating. We see this again and again in a bunch of cases where you just don't have any leads, and the family is still waiting for answers. And, we just hear this often. And it wasn't until 2004 where they got some more information. So now it's 14 years later since that barn door message. And specifically, this is Memorial Weekend, 2004 in Grabville, Indiana. A little girl, Emily Higgs, found a plastic bag on her pink bicycle. And so when she found it, ella luego se la llevó a su mamá. And cuando su mamá la abrió and, found what was inside, ella vio a used condom and a very threatening letter.
Ooh, I feel like that's... I don't know how I would feel if, as a mom, my son came to me with a bag like that.
Yeah.
And the letter reads, and we quote, "Hi, honey, I've been watching you. I am the same person that kidnapped and raped April Tinsley. You are my next victim." But like there were a few words that were misspelled in this letter. For example, April is spelled wrong. And this time the last name is spelled correctly, which is the opposite of the message that was found at the barn door, right? Just a little F.
The opposite, yeah.
Yeah. Just something, to take note of. And this family was not aware of April Tinsley's murder because they moved to Grabville 11 years after her murder. Pero una amiga de la familia que sí sabía del caso de April les dijo que era mejor que llamaran a la policía y entregaran esta nota con las otras cosas que llegaron en la bolsa. And I mean, even if they didn't know who April Tinsley was, like, you would want to call to the...
Porque ¿quién dejó esta nota? Esta persona sabe dónde viven, right? Because I'm assuming like
dice
it's
que se
kind
está
of...
viendo.
Yeah, like in the same neighborhood or something. So, of course, I think this is definitely something that should be reported. And just to clarify, this is 16 miles north of Fortwayne, where April Tinsley disappeared from. And so, yeah, this family did report this note. And when authorities got a hold of this note, they compared it to the note that was found at the barn door. And they found that, the handwriting and everything was really similar.
And so a total of 4 similar packages or, notes were sent to different little girls. And they were found on a bike or mailbox. Entonces, whoever was leaving this kind of had a pattern. They were found with used condoms and notes saying that the person who left the condoms was the person responsible for killing April. And this person left a used condom or a Polaroid of a naked man from neck down on a bed, which is honestly just really disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
And authorities trataron, de just notice details que estaban en la foto, like the bed sheets or hoteles or locations, anything, something que podía conectarlos a alguien. Pero desafortunadamente no había nada. Like, they made the bedsheet public to have anyone come forward if they recognized it, but nothing was ever really connected.
And so, yeah, these notes are being dropped off at bicycles or, like homes pretty much. It's not being mailed. Mm-hmm. So, like, yeah, it's super creepy to think, like, how did this person choose, or how long did they stick around?
Yeah.
Like, when did they feel like okay to drop it off? Like, I just, but I am glad that, like, investigators are, doing as much as they can, like, looking at the picture and,
mm-hmm.
and like, if they were to, like, recognize the, the blanket or the sheets, like, from a hotel, then they can go in there and, like, ask, like, who got a room in the last year or something like that.
And it's also just, like, very interesting como, like, they focus a lot on the bed sheets y se puede ver como un small little detail, but it can probably open up a lot of doors.
And so in one of these, like, drop-offs of these letters, witnesses did come forward, and they said that they saw a 4-screen van in the neighborhood during the time that the notes were being delivered.
Y después pudieron confirmar que la ADN que estaba en el crime scene de April and the DNA que fue encontrada en estos mensajes were a match. So that means that this was the same person.
And so at this point, they are looking for one person. And the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit released a suspect profile. Y, they did say that this person was a white male between the ages of 40 and 50, someone who frequents places where children are likely to be at, someone who focuses on little girls, someone who owns or borrowed a Polaroid the year of 2004, someone who possibly owned or borrowed a 4-screen pickup truck having a matching camper shell with dark tinted windows. And there was a few more, but, like, that was a list that they, shared with the public.
Which is also very oddly specific, but I guess it's pretty good. And on September 18th, 2006, las autoridades le estaban preguntando al público que si alguien reconocía la escritura que estaba en las letras o en las notas, que por favor hablaran, for them to come forward and speak up. Porque, I don't know, I feel like it's scary because, one, like, this person is claiming to kill April, so you kind of know what they are capable of. And also, like, just, like, what they're doing, like, with the 8-year-old girls, like, it's
wrong.
It's wrong. It's sick.
Y es alguien que cometió este crimen in, 1988, and that was just 2004. So it's like, this person is still thinking about this and, like, taunting the police and, I don't know, kind of saying, like, oh, I'm still out here.
Yeah. It's scary.
On April 11th, 2009, America's Most Wanted aired a case on April's case. To help the case, and again, they released another episode on August 25th, 2012, with a new conversation around Fortwayne Police Department crime scene technician Chris Meals, a retired detective, and former FBI profiler Jennifer Atkin. And they discussed how Chris had 513 suspects, but narrowed it down to 81. And 12 of those refused to let their DNA tested. So, I mean, we're just saying this because, like, there was, like, some attention, like, effort in trying to get this case, get some answers now being 2009 and then 2012, having these episodes being released. It's just good to see that, there was still some effort.
Yeah. And I mean, also in this episode, they kind of released a few details que nunca se supo saber de el caso. Like, por ejemplo, estaban hablando about the sex toy that was found at the scene, which was inside a Sears bag. And it's just described as disturbing. Like, we don't know too much about it. Pero esto era algo que nunca se supo before this episode.
And, ya hemos hablado sobre esto que, in some cases, los investigadores no quieren dar todos los detalles, right? And so I think this was one of those details que, they didn't share to the public, and they were now sharing it with hoping that, this would bring hints and leads, especially after, having an episode with this big of exposure. They just, were hoping that they would get something out of it. Pero desafortunadamente, they don't get anything from this.
And in May 2016, which now it's crazy to think about how we started this case in 1988 and now we're in 2016, a DNA profile was conducted by Parabon Nanolabs with the 2004 DNA samples because the original DNA sample had been used up over the years.
Yo pienso que eso, like, the fact that this person left more of their DNA is, like, crazy, but also, like, super helpful for the case porque, they probably had limited DNA from the actual crime scene, but when they confirmed that both DNAs belong to the same person, it's like they have a lot of DNA. So
now they do, yeah.
So Parabon Nanolabs take the DNA, and then they also have the sketch that they've made before. And so what they do is that they look at the genetic markers and the DNA analysis, which then they use both, and they try to determine features that can predict a face and ancestry and face shape and all these other things. And they did produce a photo of what the person will look like at 1988 and another photo of what they might look like at 2016.
Technology, man, never fails to amaze me. So yeah, Fortwayne police released a new sketch of the suspect in April's murder while using a forensics DNA analysis called Snapshot by Parabon Nanolabs, which is pretty cool, honestly, to see like the development. And in May 2018, they still use this method. And just like a little side note, like this is the same method that authorities use to capture the Golden State Killer. Which is pretty cool.
And so in 2018, this is a decade later.
Crazy, yeah.
The detective on April Tinsley's case, Brian Martin, mandó the DNA sample to Parabon Nanolabs.
And they used a GED match, and DNA was compared to other samples on GED match. And they narrowed the searches to two brothers, one being John D. Miller, of now 59 years old.
El 12 de julio del año 2018, investigadores empezaron a seguir a John B. Miller at his mobile home at 13722 Main Street, Lot 4 in Grauville, Indiana.
And he just happened to live so close to the barn, by the way.
El 6 de julio del año 2018, investigadores agarraron la basura from his mobile home and they found 3 used condoms. And they ran tests, right, to compare to the DNA that they have from the condoms obtained in 2004. And it turns out that both DNA samples are consistent.
Crazy de pensar que tanto tiempo ha pasado and like how this guy like estaba dejando estas notas or like these used condoms and like he really thought he was going to get away with it.
And yeah, like he's still living his life if you think about it for 3 decades.
Y ya que lo trajeron to the police station para entrevistarlo, los detectives le preguntan que si él sabe por qué él está allí. Y él les contesta, April Tinsley. And right off the bat, this was a good sign for detectives because this was a sign that he was going to talk. And also like the fact that he just, not admitted, right, that he was the one who murdered April, but just the fact that he knows that somehow he's connected to this, but they didn't even tell him.
Yeah.
And it's also a case that happened how many years ago? Like, I think it's also a sign that he knew something was coming,
He knew that the day was going to come where they would figure it out that it was him. Creo que como like, he was just kind of, I imagined him almost like calm and like, oh, you're here for that?
Yeah. Or like it took you this long.
Yeah. El 12 de julio del año 2018, John B. Miller fue arrestado after telling the police that he did kill April Tinsley and dumped her body near DeKalb County Road 68 near Spencerville.
John told authorities that he was driving around when he saw April y que decidió parquearse a block before her. Y que él esperó afuera de su vehículo for her to walk by. And then when she kind of, approached him, he forced her and made her get into his car and took her to his trailer. And that's where he sexually assaulted and strangled her. Y después dice que él echó su cuerpo de April in a ditch off County Road 68 in DeKalb County the next day.
El 19 de julio del año 2018, John B. Miller was brought to Allen County Judge John F. Serbeck and he charged him with felony murder, child molestation, and criminal confinement, and was sentenced to 80 years in prison with no chance of appeal.
Good. I'm glad. That's what he should have gone years
before.
ago.
Yeah, he lived a free life for 30 years.
Y el diciembre del 2018, John D. Miller pleaded guilty, and he will serve 50 years for the murder and 30 years for child molestation.
Jeanette, April's mom, told him in court, and I quote, "You took her life. We want yours." End quote.
That's a pretty deep quote.
Yeah, it's a deep quote. And I mean, like we read it, she was saying that 80 years that he's getting is far less than what he put the family through. And I agree with that.
Mm-hmm. And this all was for April Tinsley's family, but it was also for the girls who received the notes. It was also for the girls that he was watching, to the girls that he was threatening. He was just, I don't know, like, how do you... He was just...
He needed to be off the streets and, like, stop terrorizing, parents and little girls in the community. Because
scary.
Who's to say, like, he was going to continue doing these notes, and, like, what if he did strike again?
Yeah.
Act up on these threats from these notes.
Yeah.
So...
We do have a quote from Crystal Higgs, which we mentioned earlier in the episode, quien era mamá de Emily, the little girl who received one of his letters. And she said that this is closure, that his capture is closure, no more nights of fear, and that she can't believe John Miller was responsible because she would pass by his trailer so many times.
Isn't that crazy?
Por eso decimos que caras vemos, corazones no sabemos, because, I mean, behind closed doors, you really don't know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's scary.
So, yeah, that's all that we have for this case. It's always nice that we have closure, for this case. And I think this case in particular, it's nice to hear that, they did find justice, even though that it was 30 years later.
Yeah. But at least now he is serving his time. And como dijo la mamá de la niña, like, no more nights of fear. Which, I mean... There always is fear, right, in the world of true crime. But at least this one's gone. Thank you all for listening to this week's episode. And we'll see you all next week.